Welcome. I'm Jennifer Firestein, Associate State Director for AARP Michigan. We're glad you're joining us for AARP's virtual Learn a Latte. Learn a Latte is our Wednesday morning speaker series where we invite you to sit back, relax with your coffee, tea, or latte, and learn something new. Over the next half hour, our guest speaker will teach us how to master difficult conversations. He'll give us the tools to stay cool, calm, and collected when the stakes are high. If you have questions, ask them in the comment section and we'll answer them throughout the presentation. That's the benefit of watching live. You get to ask the expert. This is being recorded and you'll be able to access it here on the AARP Michigan Facebook page, or you can visit us at aarp.org/mi. That way you can watch this presentation or share it with others. Joining me today is Kevin Jurek. Kevin is a facilitator at the Institute for Professional Excellence at Davenport University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Kevin has been in the training development field for more than 20 years. During that time, he's led large-scale projects to develop and deliver effective leadership development programs. His programs have been delivered throughout the United States and Canada, and Kevin's training specialties include areas like communication skills, problem-solving skills, change management, and team dynamics. Kevin is a nationally certified facilitator for many of the major training organizations in America. He's also a certified human performance improvement specialist. So Kevin, thank you for being here.
Thanks. It's great to be here and great to be back with you. It's been, a few months. I was with you last time, but here I am back again. So thanks for having me back.
At the start of the year, you were here. So yeah, we're glad to have you back.
It's good to be back. And thanks for having me. What an interesting topic we have today. I mean, you look at the title and it almost looks scary. Mastering the difficult conversation. Right. I don't even want to hear it. You're supposed to be relaxing and having a latte, like difficult conversation. But you know what? It's something that we have every day, or should be having. Not that we're looking for a conflict, but it happens all the time. And so many people are afraid of it, probably because they don't know how to enter into it. Number one. And number two, how to get out of it once they get into it. And so today, that's what we want to do. And so there's me. Let's go to the next slide. And Jennifer kind of talked about this already. So what we want to do is, how do I even prepare to have that conversation? Sometimes they come up spur of the moment, but there's a lot of times where we have a chance to prepare ourselves mentally to go into it. How to stay calm, cool, and collected. We'll give you some tips and tricks on how to keep yourself at ease as you're going through that conversation with another, and then techniques to find out what happened in the first place so that it doesn't happen again. So some preventive medicine so we can get through that again. Okay, let's jump right into this. We're going to leave you with some tools. We're going to leave you some tools with how to talk during the conversation, but we'll leave you with some tools on how to listen during the conversation, because just the sense of the word conversation means two-way, right? So many times in conversation during conflict, it's I'm imposing my will on you, or you're imposing your will on me. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the key word there is conversation. So we're going to give you some tools on how to be both a good confronter, if I could use that word. Is it a word? It is now. A good confronter and a good listener at the same time. So you're going to get a framework. So most of the time when I'm working in a classroom on conflict resolution and difficult conversations, I ask the class to give me a definition of what conflict is without using negative terms. And they have a really hard time, because what we've kind of inherently learned, or just because of competitive nature, or just sometimes our culture, it's who's wrong in this? Who should be blamed for this? Well, that's not where conflict and difficult conversation should go. We should be making a shift from who's wrong here to we're in this together. So let me give you a definition of conflict as I use in my classrooms that doesn't use negative words. Conflict means two or more people in a given situation, each with unmet needs. So that's not in your slide. I'm going to say it again. So if you're taking notes at home, so conflict is two people in a given situation, each with unmet needs. I have a friend who's a clinical.
Kevin,
Yes,
that
Jennifer.
comes down to a power struggle, right? Because we all have something that we want, and if we're not getting it, then it creates conflict. And so that's why we end up in these states of conflict, because it's a power struggle of my needs versus your wants and vice versa.
Right. And it really depends on the people too, right? You have somebody that might be a little bit more submissive in there where they might not bring it up, or they're overly aggressive in that, or worse yet, if you have two people that are overly aggressive, now you've got this going on. And so I have a friend who's a clinical psychologist, and he says basically in a conflict situation, he does a lot of family and marriage counseling. He says in those situations, basically it's two people, each with a rock wall up in front of them. And the only way for the conversation to even begin is for each person to remove the rocks off their wall. I can take mine down. I can't take Jennifer the rocks off her wall. I can ask her to, I can show her how to, but I can't take the rocks down off Jennifer's wall. So by using the tools that we're going to talk about today, we can both take down the rocks off our wall so that we can enter into trying to find some solution to the problem that helps us both get our needs met.
And I imagine too that these tools prevent those rocks from maybe even going up in the first place.
Right. Yep. Because if we're declaring that something's not right before it even happens, setting expectations for people, for example, that's where that comes in. So the slide that's in front of you, Douglas Stone wrote a book called Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters Most. And it's interesting quote. He says, difficult conversations are almost never about getting the facts right. What happened, right? We see it in front of us. But the problem is we have conflicting perceptions or interpretations or values. And so what we're going to talk about next, real briefly, is what those three things are. Let's talk about perception. Perception is how I see a particular thing that just happened. I was watching the Boston Red Sox versus the Houston Astros in the championship series last night, and the umpire made a call, and the manager for the Red Sox did not like it. And he came right out of the dugout and began to argue with the umpire. They both saw the same play. The rule is the rule, right? There was a guy was thrown out at first base. The rule is the rule. If the ball beats the runner to first base, it's an out. But the way they saw the play was different. That's a perception issue. The second one is interpretation. This is how you explain kind of obscure things. So the example that I use here will be dress code. I worked in a corporate environment for many, many years, and they had dress code, right? And when I first started working in the real world in the 80s, when I got out of college, we wore a suit and tie to work. That was our dress code for the men. Well, then we all switched to business casual, air quotes. And what did that really mean? They weren't really defined that well. And so some people would come to work dressed in a particular way, and some people would come dressed in another way. Well, there were really different interpretations of what that meant. And so that's where a difference of interpretation could come into play. The third one might be the most important one of all of them, and it's values. This could be a conflict in our personal values. We see the same thing, but the way we feel about it is different. It could be a cultural difference. It could be a religious difference, right? There's also a difference in how we value speed. If you have any married couples on the broadcast today, she wants to get there early. He doesn't want to be there till the very time the event begins. I want to pay my bills right when I get them in the mail. Let's pay them on their due date. I call it the need for speed. All right. And the last thing is sometimes people have different emphases on relationships versus results. I want to get to know somebody. Well, I'd rather just put my donation in the collection plate at church and call it good enough. I want to get involved more. I'd rather just show up on Sunday. So these differences are where conflicts really come from. So what I want to talk about now is, okay, we're in a situation. How do I approach the other person? Because now I have an unmet need. When we go to somebody, we just want to, we don't want to jump in with, hey, you're doing this, I don't like it. We automatically put the person on defensive. So what we want to do is kind of break the ice a little bit, kind of ease into it and say, hey, Jennifer, do you have a minute? Hey, I'd like to talk to you about something because blank. That's how you open the conversation. That's how you open the difficult conversations, with that quote right there.
So ease into it. Don't automatically go on the attack to make the other person defensive, right? Before you even start.
So they know something's about to come, but we're kind of like when, I can still drive a stick shift. When we're letting the clutch out, we can't just let the clutch fly. We'll stall the engine out. We're letting the clutch out slowly so that we can begin to engage the vehicle. Okay. So that's how the conversation begins. We do have a question before we go to the next slide. Do you mind if we take that, Jennifer? Or do you...
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So it's basically a need to repeat the definition of conflict. Really what it was two people in a given situation, each with unmet needs. Okay, so we've broken the ice. We said, I want to talk to you about because what? So we're going to talk about three components of the statement that you need to make. The first one is the behavior. This is the observed behavior, not what somebody told you, not what you read on somebody's Facebook post. This is something that you actually observed, okay? You use your five senses, taste, smell, see, right? I've actually noticed this behavior, okay? One of the things you have to really avoid is judgment words. So what you don't want to say is, I think you blank. No, I saw you, right? And the judgment words really will point to, rightly or wrongly, the person's motive for doing what they're doing. We don't want to do that. All we're stating is the obvious. Just the facts, ma'am, like the old Dragnet TV show. Just the facts, ma'am. And then avoid making the assumptions. We kind of talked about that already. So what you're saying is, I've seen that you have done blank lately, or today you blank, right? And it's what you saw. It can't be denied. It happened. In the workplace, we said, you were 20 minutes late for work today. That's the fourth time this month. It can't be denied. So if the person asks the question, so how do you know that? You have to be able to say, you don't say, well, I thought you did, or somebody told me. You say, I saw it. So the first part of that confrontation statement is the behavior you noticed.
And concrete evidence of what you're seeing and hearing.
Yes, it's indisputable. I saw it. I heard it. Right? Any of the five senses.
And Kevin, is this where like the I versus you statements come in? Instead of saying you did this, you caused this, it's shifting it so that it's I feel this because of that behavior.
Yeah. So the first thing we state is what we saw. In the next slide, we'll talk about really two things. It shows as one, but I'm going to talk about two. The second thing is the effect that behavior had on you. And I want to add a word in here, and it's the tangible effect that the behavior had on you. So really what this means is what the person did caused me to spend unnecessary time, money, or energy to deal with that behavior. So if your daughter missed curfew again this week, you can say it was 12:30, your curfew's midnight. I was really worried and I lost a bunch of sleep last night. So the effect is on my health, on my energy. And if you notice, I put one other thing in here. So it's not only the effect, but it's how you feel about it. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't tell the person how you felt about it, they'll say, well, so what? So one thing I want you to be careful of when you talk about the way that you're feeling about that behavior, I want you to avoid the word anger at all costs. Anger is what's called, because anger is what we call a secondary emotion. Anger is generally another emotion on steroids. Worry, anxiety, fear, embarrassment. And so before you utter the word, I'm angry about it, which you may, I mean, if this is like, the umpteenth iteration of this behavior, you may say, hey, I'm angry about this. Before you use that word, check yourself mentally at the door and say, what's really causing this anger in me? And choose that emotion first. Because that's really the true emotion.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does.
So we've stated the behavior, we've stated how we feel about the behavior, we've stated the tangible effect on it. One thing I want you to be really careful of in looking at this slide, it says describe the effect their behavior is having on the team, the project, the company, your family, etc. Be really careful here in talking about other people, the effect on other people, unless they've really actually told you that they have some kind of effect. Don't say, I think it's really affecting your mother this way. Say, hey, mom called me on the phone and she was really upset and she told me this. Right. So in a court of law, we would call that hearsay, right?
Right.
So if you're talking about the effect on other people, make sure it's something that they actually told you.
Yeah. So speak for yourself.
You can't say, well, right.
Yep.
I think mom's really upset about this. I don't, when I say I think somebody feels this way, or I think this is the effect on somebody, you can really shoot yourself in the foot because you might be really wrong and then the conflict gets worse.
Right.
So we've delivered the message. Now we have to wait for the person to respond because this is a conversation, right? So in the next slide, we're going to talk about this thing called change. People almost never change without first feeling understood. So we presented our side of the story, and now we have to allow the other person to explain themselves. So look at the next slide. We have to allow them time to respond. Remember, silence is an effective communication tool. I don't normally do this on broadcast, but I'm going to give us 7 full seconds of dead air just to let you feel what 7 seconds of complete silence sounds like. Here we go. There's 7 seconds. If I stated my words, let that person formulate their thoughts, especially if they're very cerebral or they're a real deep thinker. They may need to formulate their words before they come out. We're not trying to start an argument here. We're trying to start a conversation. And when they say what they're going to say, you can say things like, help me understand. Why do you feel that way? Give me some more information on that. What gave you that sentiment? We'd hope for an apology, right? Because we didn't blame them for anything. We just stated what happened and how we felt about it. We'd hope for an apology or a commitment to change, or it won't happen again. But sometimes we get some flack, right? And so what we have to do is, and there's the statement from Covey's. Can you go back to the understand slide for me, Karina? Thanks. So first, seek to understand, then be understood. This is from Stephen Covey's 7 Highly Effective Habits. It's been around for decades. It's still true today. First, seek to understand, then to be understood. So what this means is we have to be ready, willing, and able to listen to the other person. What we're listening for are 2 things. We're listening for the facts that they're sharing with us, and we're listening for the feeling that we feel that they're telling us. So it says, I would say something like, Jennifer, it sounds like you're really nervous about the new change in our schedule. Jennifer could say, well, I'm not really nervous. I'm some other emotion. But yeah, this new change is really kind of throwing me for a loop. Now the conversation can go.
Yeah. And I think that the listening part and the understanding part is really difficult sometimes, because especially when it's a conflict that's heated, or you really are standing your ground on something, you're not listening. You're actually formulating in your head what you're going to say next, because you're on the defensive and you're ready to go on the attack with what you want to say.
Right. So one of the things that they call this active listening. The term's been around since the 50s. Guy by the name of Dr. Thomas Gordon actually coined the phrase down at Ohio State. And this really works. If you are really listening well, using that active listening where you're sharing what the facts were and what you think they're feeling, it actually lowers their blood pressure, if you will. It calms them down. You'll see this in police situations, right? They're doing very good active listening when they're talking to somebody who's been pulled over or a victim of a crime or something like that. So, just by simply being a good listener can help calm the other individual down. Here's the other problem that we have in listening in our world today. Devices get in the way. Yeah, dear, I'm listening to you. What do you want? If I had a boss once, you go into her office, the first thing she would do is flip the laptop lid down. so that we could talk. My grandma, God rest her soul, when I'd go to her house, the first thing she would do, she'd always have a Tiger ball game on or the Lions or some Detroit sports game on the radio. The first thing she would do is turn the radio off and go get us a Vernors to split. And we sit at her kitchen table. I think we've lost the art of conversation in our cell phone, instant messaging world. And good listeners are really, to me, just good conversationalists.
And is it fair to say in conflict, when you're having that issue, the conflict, the conversation, to say, I really need you to listen to me on this? Like, if you feel or sense that the person's not listening, is it fair to say that, or saying, I really need you to understand my point on this? Does it cause the other person to step back and kind of breathe a little bit?
Yeah, but you got to do that in the right way, right? So we just talked about how to confront somebody. You can say, I notice you still have your phone out right now. Could you put that down because I'm not feeling heard right now? Mm-hmm. So, instead of saying, listen to me, I mean, that's what it would say. I don't want to say, boy, I notice your phone's still out, or I really notice you're distracted by the television show right now. I wonder if we could just turn that off for a minute, because I'm really feeling like you're looking distracted to me. And this is really important for me to talk about with you. Okay. So we've confronted the problem. They've come back to us. We're having a conversation. We still both have unmet needs. So what do we need to do? Next slide. We need to come up with a solution. And because we each have unmet needs, we need to come up with a solution that's going to help both of those needs get met. Now, this is a half a day workshop to do this with brainstorming. And so let me boil this down to one solution, or one statement. If it's determined that both parties have unmet needs, we need to list things that could possibly work. And then we have to go through that list and say, which of these would work for you? Jennifer, does that work for you? Well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Okay, then it doesn't work for me either. Jennifer, does that one work for you? Yep. Yeah, I don't think so. That would be really a killer on our family budget. How about the third one? Jennifer says, yeah, that's cool. I can make that work too. So we'll circle it. So we had a list of maybe 15 things. And we got it whittled down to 3 that we both agreed upon. If we can't agree to anything, then one thing's going to happen. I'm going to impose my will on you and you're not happy, or you're going to impose your will on me and I'm not happy. And the conflict is going to go on and on and on for years. So find a list of things that could possibly work. Crazier the idea, the better. Pick a few that you think might work, and then we have to pick one out. The next slide talks about something that's very important. It doesn't get brought up very often in conflict resolution. I have to personally express a faith in both myself and you to move forward with the solution. If there's not a big level of trust here, the probability of that solution taking place, let alone working, is pretty slim.
So in a situation where you've lost trust in the nature of that relationship, how do you begin to build it up to get to this point? Is it through constant communication? You have to just keep practicing this?
Yeah, you have to prove yourself, I think, right? Because when we trust someone, there's really 2 things you have to trust in a person in order to fully trust them. And they both begin with the letter C. The first thing is I have to trust your character. So I trust that you say what you're going to do, you're honest with me, etc. The second C is one that isn't often brought up in the trust discussion, and it's competency. I trust that if we put the solution in place, that you know how to do what you're going to do. So I can trust somebody's character, but not their competence. That's that really nice person that doesn't know what they're doing. But I can also trust somebody's competence, but not their character. They're really good at this, but they're kind of shady. So in order to move forward and build that trust, I have to work really hard at trusting both their competence and their character. And you have to do the same for the other person, because it's a 2-way street. Okay. That's very cliche-ish, but. Okay, so what I want to do next is I want to go over a couple of tips to help you in difficult conversations. So we're going to go through these couple things kind of briefly, but they're important to know. So the first thing is, how do I keep my cool through this? scientific studies have shown is when you are upset about something in this conversation, leading up to the conversation, during the conversation, what happens is there's a little thing in your brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is the part of the brain that kicks in when there is an emergency. So a kid ran out in front of my car in the street. The amygdala says, put the brakes on quick. And so sometimes the amygdala kicks in, and it should. Other times, like what we're talking about today, the amygdala kicks in and it's false. And so what you have to do is say, I understand that somebody just pushed my button or pulled my trigger. You got to learn to step back and control those. It's a hard thing to do, but you got to at least understand when the trigger has been pulled or the button has been pushed. Okay. Practice your breathing. Yeah. Visualize the meeting going smoothly. This is if you have time to understand that the conversation is going to happen and get ready for it. Speak positively about the situation. Yeah. Here's one that's not on the list that I like to use personally when I'm in a conversation with someone. I like to call it seeing it from the balcony. So if I'm watching this conversation happen, and I'm on a balcony and I'm watching this conversation happen, and I'm watching me, would I be proud of what I'm doing or what I'm saying right now?
So kind of taking that bird's eye view of the situation.
Right. If my mother was on that balcony watching me, would she be proud of the way I'm behaving? Or my wife or my kids, right? So that's how to maintain your composure.
Okay.
The next thing we want to talk about real briefly is techniques for how to uncover underlying issues. This is, I'm going to give you one technique. We use it a lot in project management. It's called the 5 whys. You ask why 5 times. If you've ever raised a 5-year-old, they ask why all the time. But if we ask why, we get to the very root of an issue, because sometimes what we're arguing about isn't what the issue really is at all. And so if we ask ourselves, well, why is that a bad thing? And we go down, usually after 3 or 4 iterations, if you don't get punched in the nose, you've come to the real root of the problem. And now we know what we're getting at. That's a good technique for uncovering underlying ideas and helping you take rocks off the wall. Here's the last one. Gain agreement on moving forward. Determine follow-up. Here's 3 things. When you have the solution picked, you say who does what by when. Who does what by when? I have responsibilities to make this happen. You have responsibilities to make that happen. Let's come back in a couple weeks and see how it's going. So we've chosen the solution, and this is how we implement the solution. Main part is getting an agreement. So, and then the last slide is to prevent a reoccurrence. Just say, hey, what did we learn from this? How can we stop it from happening next time? Just put some preventive measures, stop gaps in there, for that to happen. It could be, hey, you pushed my button, just so you know that's a button of mine. Don't push it again, or be careful next time you do it. So, and the same for you. Whew, we did it.
We did it.
So the next slide shows a code from Davenport University. We do individual team coaching. We do corporate training. We do nonprofits. So if you'd like to do more with IPEX, there's the way that you can get a hold of them. And that's what I have for the day.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. And just as a follow-up on this conversation, this type of conflict resolution can work in any kind of setting, correct? So absolutely. It could be between a boss and a report. It could be between husband and a wife, between a mother and a child.
Yep. You and your best friend, right? I mean, person you've never met before in a department store. So that's really hard there because you don't know them, but
right.
But it's a tool that works with anyone. So yeah.
Well, thank you, Kevin. This was very informative, very interesting. I feel like I'm walking away with a number of things that just will help, in whatever situation, whether it's colleagues or family or whomever. So I think this was very valuable information, and I hope that our viewers also feel the same way. So I would just encourage our viewers to join us again for AARP's Learn a Latte, the first and third Wednesday of each month. We are here on Facebook from 10 to 10:30. And we also have a host of a lot of other fun things that we are doing between drum circles and educational events. And just we've got a comedy show coming up. So we encourage you to visit aarp.org/MI for a full list of all of our virtual events. So thank you.